I set up a camera in my backyard forest and let it record for 3 years straight. 3 years of nothing but deer, raccoons, and the occasional bear. Then, one night last September, I captured something that made me wish I'd never started this whole thing. What I recorded changed everything I thought I knew about what exists in those woods. And what happened after I got that footage nearly killed me. Let me back up and tell you how this whole thing started, because I think context matters here. Maybe you'll understand why I got so obsessed in the first place. I live on about 40 acres of heavily wooded land in the Pacific Northwest. Bought the property about 8 years ago because I wanted space, privacy, and honestly, I just love being surrounded by trees. There's something peaceful about waking up to nothing but forest in every direction. The house sits on a small clearing, but most of my land is dense, old-growth forest that backs up against thousands of acres of protected wilderness. When I tell you this place is remote, I mean it. My nearest neighbor is about 2 miles down a dirt road, and cell service is basically non-existent once you get past my driveway. The mailman won't even come up to the house, just leaves everything in a box at the bottom of the hill. For the first few years, I didn't think much about what might be living in those woods. Sure, I'd hear coyotes at night, see deer wandering through the property, occasionally spot a black bear rummaging through something it shouldn't. Normal stuff for living out here. I knew mountain lions were around even though I never saw one. Found their tracks a few times near the creek. The usual suspects for Pacific Northwest forest life. But then something changed around 4 years ago. It started with sounds, deep, guttural vocalizations that would echo through the trees after dark. Not coyotes, those have a yipping quality you can recognize immediately. Not owls either. Not anything I could identify despite growing up around forests my whole life. These sounds were different, deeper, longer, almost human in a way that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up every single time I heard them. They would start low and build in intensity, sometimes lasting 10 or 15 seconds. The first few times I heard them, I told myself it was probably just some animal I wasn't familiar with. Maybe an elk making weird noises during mating season. I tried really hard to convince myself there was a normal explanation. But then I started finding things, massive footprints in the mud near my creek. We're talking prints that were easily 18 inches long and maybe 7 inches wide. Way too big for any person, and the stride length between them was insane. Like whatever made them was covering 4 feet with each step. The depth of the impressions suggested something incredibly heavy. I measured everything, documented it with photos and notes. And I started to wonder if maybe all those stories people told weren't completely made up. The breaking point came when I found a tree structure about half a mile from my house. Someone or something had taken multiple large branches and woven them together between 2 trees, creating this weird teepee-like formation. The branches were thick, some of them probably 60 or 70 pounds, bent and broken in ways that would have taken serious strength. No person could have done that without tools, and there were no tool marks anywhere. The breaks were clean, like someone had just snapped them with their bare hands. I stood there looking at that structure for probably 20 minutes, trying to come up with any rational explanation. I couldn't. That's when I became obsessed with finding out what was living in my woods. Look, I know how this sounds. Trust me, I do. Before all this, if someone had told me they were hunting for Bigfoot, I would have nodded politely and slowly backed away from the conversation. But when you're finding evidence on your own property, evidence you can see and touch and measure, it changes something in your brain. You can't just ignore it and go about your life. I needed to know. So I started investing in cameras, trail cameras, motion-activated cameras, infrared cameras that could see in the dark. Over the course of a year, I probably spent close to $10,000 on equipment. My bank account hated me. I set up a network of cameras throughout my property, covering trails, water sources, areas where I'd found evidence before. Every week, I'd hike out to swap memory cards and batteries, hoping each time that I'd captured something. For 2 years, I got nothing useful. Plenty of deer footage, lots of raccoons showing off for the camera at night. One memorable clip of a black bear scratching its back on a tree for about 10 minutes straight, which was honestly hilarious, but not what I was looking for. But nothing unexplained, nothing that would prove what I was hearing at night wasn't just my imagination running wild. 2 years of nothing. I started questioning myself, started wondering if I'd made up all those earlier experiences in my head. My approach changed last spring. Instead of just setting up cameras and hoping for the best, I decided to be more strategic about it. I spent weeks mapping locations where I'd found evidence, cross-referencing them with water sources and game trails. Bigfoot, if it existed, would need to drink. It would need to eat. It would follow paths of least resistance through the forest just like any other large animal. So I focused my camera network on areas where all these factors overlapped. Choke points where any large animal moving through the area would almost certainly pass. I also started leaving food. Apples mostly because they'd last a few days without rotting. Sometimes fish I'd caught from the creek. I'd pile them near camera locations and check back regularly. For months, the food would either sit there untouched or get taken by animals I could clearly identify on footage. But then something interesting happened. Food started disappearing from locations where my camera showed no animal visitors. Nothing on the footage, but the food was gone. Something was coming in at angles my cameras didn't cover. It was late July, maybe around 2 a.m. Hot night, couldn't sleep, so I was sitting on my back porch with a beer, just enjoying the quiet. Stars were incredible out here without any light pollution. I was feeling peaceful for the first time in months when I heard that vocalization again. That deep, resonating call that didn't sound like any known animal. But this time it was close, really close, maybe a few hundred yards into the tree line. Close enough that I could almost feel the vibration of it in my chest. I froze, just sat there listening, barely breathing. My hand tightened on the beer bottle like it was some kind of weapon. And then I heard a response. A second call, coming from a different direction, maybe half a mile away to the north. Then a third, even further out to the east. Whatever these things were, there were multiple of them, and they were communicating with each other, calling back and forth across the forest like they were checking in or coordinating something. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Part of me wanted to run inside and lock every door, but another part, the part that had spent years and thousands of dollars trying to get proof, knew I had to investigate. This was my chance. This was what I'd been waiting for. I grabbed my flashlight and my phone and headed toward where I'd heard the first call. The forest was pitch black under the canopy, and even with the flashlight, I could only see maybe 20 feet ahead. Every snap of a twig under my boots sounded impossibly loud in the silence. Every rustle in the underbrush made me flinch. I'd gone maybe 100 yards when I smelled it. This overwhelming stench, like a wet dog mixed with rotting garbage and something musky I couldn't identify. The smell was so strong it actually made my eyes water, burned the inside of my nose. I'd read about this online, how witnesses often described a powerful odor associated with Bigfoot sightings. But reading about it and experiencing it are two very different things. Nothing could have prepared me for how intense that smell was. I stopped walking and slowly swept my flashlight beam through the trees. Nothing, just shadows and underbrush and the dark shapes of tree trunks. But I knew something was there. I could feel it watching me. That primal sense that we've inherited from thousands of years of being prey told me I wasn't alone. The hair on my arms stood up. Every instinct screamed at me to run. Then I heard it. Heavy footsteps, maybe 30 feet to my left, moving parallel to me through the brush. Whatever was making those sounds was big. Each footfall had a weight to it that made the ground seem to vibrate slightly. I whipped my flashlight toward the noise, but by the time the beam reached that area, there was nothing visible. Just the sound of those footsteps fading deeper into the forest, moving away from me. I didn't sleep that night, just sat in my living room with every light in the house on, waiting for dawn, replaying what had just happened over and over in my head. After that night, things escalated quickly. It was like whatever was in those woods had noticed me noticing it, and now we were engaged in some kind of strange standoff. I started finding more evidence closer to my house. Footprints in my garden pressed deep into the soft soil. Claw marks on trees at the edge of my yard scratched into the bark at a height of about 7 feet. One morning, I woke up to find my garbage cans knocked over and the contents scattered across my driveway, but nothing had been eaten. It was like something had been searching through my trash, examining things, turning items over, and then just left everything there, not scavenging, investigating. The vocalizations became more frequent too. Almost every night, I'd hear those deep calls echoing through the darkness, and they were getting closer. Sometimes they'd start at the far edge of my property and work their way toward the house over the course of an hour. Sometimes I'd hear what sounded like wood knocking, this sharp crack of something solid hitting a tree trunk. Researchers say that's how Bigfoot communicates over long distances, using tree trunks like drums to send signals through the forest. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But the sound was unmistakable, and it was happening on my property. I reviewed my camera footage religiously, spending hours every day scanning through clips frame by frame. And that's when I started catching glimpses. Brief moments where something large and dark would move through the edge of the frame too fast to see clearly. A shape in the background of one shot that didn't match any tree or rock. Heat signatures on my infrared cameras that suggested something large and warm-blooded was passing through areas where I'd never seen any large animals before. The evidence was mounting, but I still didn't have anything definitive. Then came the night I got real footage. It was September 14th. I remember the date because I'd marked it on my calendar as the 1-year anniversary of my first serious evidence find. I'd set up a new camera location about a quarter mile from my house, near a small spring where I'd been leaving food offerings consistently for about 2 months. The location seemed perfect. Natural clearing with good sight lines, the spring providing fresh water, and based on the track patterns I'd found, something large had been visiting regularly. That night, I decided to stake out the location in person. I know. Looking back, this was incredibly stupid. But I was so close to getting proof, and I thought if I could just see it with my own eyes, if I could record it myself with my own camera, it would finally validate everything I'd been doing. All the time, all the money, all the judgment from people who thought I'd lost my mind. I hiked out around sunset and found a spot about 50 yards from the clearing where I could watch without being too exposed. Set myself up behind a fallen log with some brush for additional cover. I brought my best camera, a nice DSLR with good low-light capability, and I just waited. Mosquitoes ate me alive. My back ached from sitting in an awkward position, but I stayed. For hours, nothing happened. The forest settled into darkness around me. Crickets chirped their endless songs. An owl hooted somewhere in the distance. My legs cramped from sitting in the same position for so long. Around midnight, I started second-guessing myself. Maybe this was pointless. Maybe I should just go home and check the trail cameras in the morning like a normal person. Then the smell hit me again, that same overwhelming stench from July. I went completely still, trying not to even breathe too loudly. My heart immediately started racing. Something was moving through the trees to my right. I couldn't see it, but I could hear branches being pushed aside, underbrush being crushed under heavy feet. Whatever was making those sounds was big enough that it wasn't bothering to be quiet. It knew these woods. It owned these woods. I slowly raised my camera and pointed it toward the clearing, my hands shaking so badly I wasn't sure I'd be able to get a usable shot. The movement sounds stopped at the edge of the clearing. For a long moment, there was absolute silence. Even the crickets had gone quiet. Then something stepped into the open. I want to describe this as clearly as I can because I know how important the details are. What I saw was bipedal. It walked on two legs like a human, but it was massive. I'd estimate at least 7.5 feet tall, maybe 8. Its entire body was covered in dark, reddish-brown hair, matted and thick, longer around the shoulders and chest. The shoulders were enormous, broader than any human I've ever seen, and the arms hung down past where its knees would be. Way out of proportion for any human. The head sat almost directly on the shoulders with barely any visible neck, and the face was flat and dark, almost like a gorilla's, but more human in its proportions. It was carrying something, a large stick or branch, holding it in one hand, the way you might carry a walking stick or a tool. But it wasn't using it to walk, it was just holding it, carrying it purposefully, Bigfoot holding a stick. Bigfoot using tools. That's what I was looking at. That's what I was recording. I started recording. My hands were shaking so badly that the footage is jumpy and not perfectly focused, but I recorded. Bigfoot stood in the clearing for maybe 15 seconds, seeming to look around, maybe checking if the area was safe. Then it moved toward the spring where I'd left food. The way it walked was incredible to watch, completely silent despite its massive size. Each step placed with obvious intentionality. I got maybe 30 seconds of footage total before everything went wrong. I must have made some noise without realizing it. Maybe I shifted my weight and snapped a twig. Maybe my breathing got too loud in my excitement. But suddenly Bigfoot stopped moving and turned in my direction. Not toward the general area where I was hiding, directly at me, like it knew exactly where I was crouched behind that log. For a moment we just stared at each other. At least I think it was staring. In the darkness, I couldn't see its eyes clearly, just the silhouette of its massive form against the slightly lighter sky beyond the clearing. Every muscle in my body had locked up. I couldn't move if I wanted to. Then it made a sound, not the vocalization I'd heard before. This was different. A low, rumbling growl that I felt in my chest more than I heard with my ears. A warning, a very clear warning. I should have stayed still. I should have just frozen and hoped it would lose interest and move on. But panic doesn't work that way. Some ancient survival instinct kicked in, and I bolted. I ran, crashed through the underbrush without any thought to direction or noise discipline. Just pure animal terror driving me to get away as fast as possible. Branches whipped across my face. Behind me, I could hear it coming. Those heavy footsteps, the sound of branches breaking, the rustle of something huge moving through the forest at a speed that shouldn't have been possible for anything that big. I don't know how long I ran, probably only a few minutes, but it felt like hours. My lungs burned. At some point, I tripped over a root and went down hard, slamming my shoulder into a fallen log. The pain was intense, but I forced myself back up and kept moving. Couldn't stop. Stopping meant dying. The footsteps behind me had stopped. I couldn't hear anything pursuing me anymore. But that almost made it worse. At least when I could hear it, I knew where it was. The silence meant it could be anywhere. I found a large tree and pressed my back against it, trying to control my breathing, trying to listen over the pounding of my own heartbeat. For several minutes, nothing happened. The forest was completely silent, not even crickets. That kind of silence isn't natural. Everything else in those woods knew something dangerous was present. Then I heard breathing, heavy, labored breathing coming from somewhere close. Too close. I turned my head slowly, dreading what I would see, and there it was. Bigfoot was standing maybe 15 feet away from me, partially obscured by shadows between two trees, just watching. The stick it had been carrying was still in its hand. I have never been more terrified in my entire life. This thing could have killed me without any effort whatsoever. I was completely at its mercy. One swing of those massive arms and I'd be done. And we both knew it. We stood like that for what felt like forever. Bigfoot watching me. Me trying not to move, not to provoke it, barely even breathing. Up close, the smell was almost unbearable, and the size of this thing was even more impressive than I'd thought. It had to weigh at least 400 or 500 pounds, all of it muscle and bone and raw power. I was nothing compared to it. Slowly, without breaking eye contact with the shadowy form in front of me, I lowered myself to the ground. I'd read somewhere that making yourself smaller can signal submission to some primates. Show them you're not a threat. I had no idea if it would work with Bigfoot, but I was completely out of options. I crouched down, then sat, then basically curled into a ball with my arms over my head. For a few seconds, I heard nothing. Then footsteps approached, heavy footfalls that stopped just a few feet from where I was huddled on the forest floor. I could feel its presence looming over me like a shadow, could hear its breathing right above my head. Something touched my shoulder. I flinched so hard I nearly screamed. But it wasn't an attack, it was more like a prod, like Bigfoot was poking me with the stick it had been carrying, testing to see if I was alive or dangerous. The touch was surprisingly gentle considering the strength behind it. After another prod to my back, Bigfoot made that low rumbling sound again, different this time, softer maybe, less threatening. Then the footsteps retreated. By the time I gathered enough courage to look up, maybe 10 minutes later, it was gone. Vanished back into the darkness like it had never been there at all. I made it back to my house sometime around 3 a.m. My shoulder was badly bruised from the fall, already swelling. I was covered in scratches from crashing through the brush. But I was alive, and I still had my camera. The footage was there, shaky, partially unfocused, but unmistakably showing a large, bipedal, hair-covered creature walking through that clearing carrying a stick. Bigfoot. Real, documented, undeniable. I had done what countless researchers and enthusiasts had been trying to do for decades. I had proof. You'd think I would have been elated, and part of me was a small part that couldn't believe what I'd accomplished. But mostly, I was just scared. That encounter had shown me something important. Bigfoot wasn't just some mysterious forest dweller living peacefully in the wilderness. Bigfoot was a predator, an apex predator. It had tracked me through the forest with a speed and stealth that no human could match. And while it had chosen not to hurt me that night, the message was clear. If it had wanted to, there would have been nothing I could do to stop it. For the next few weeks, I stayed close to home. Didn't go into the forest after dark, didn't check my camera locations, just tried to process what had happened. But Bigfoot wasn't done with me yet. The activity around my property increased dramatically after that night. It was like my encounter had drawn attention to me somehow, made me a target of curiosity or surveillance. Every few nights I'd hear those vocalizations closer than ever before. Sometimes right at the edge of my yard, I'd find fresh tracks in the morning, massive footprints that circled my house, came right up to my windows, then retreated back into the trees. Something was watching me, studying me. One night I woke up to a sound on my roof, heavy footsteps moving across the shingles above my bedroom. I lay there frozen in the dark, listening to something massive walk slowly from one end of my house to the other. The ceiling creaked under the weight. When I finally worked up the nerve to go outside with a flashlight after dawn, there were clear impressions in the moss growing on my roof. Footprints. Bigfoot had literally climbed onto my house while I was sleeping inside. Another night, I heard scratching at my back door. Long, slow scratches that went on for almost an hour. In the morning, I found deep gouges in the door, 4 parallel lines like something with claws had been dragging them across the surface. The scratches were at about 7 feet high, way above where any normal animal could reach. Something had stood on my back porch and marked my door. I stopped sleeping much, would spend nights sitting in my living room with all the lights on, watching the tree line through the windows, jumping at every sound. Things came to a head about 3 weeks after my first encounter. I'd been out checking my trail cameras during broad daylight, figured I'd be safe with the sun up. I was maybe half a mile from my house when I realized I was being followed. Not just a feeling this time, I could hear something moving through the trees parallel to my path, maybe 20 yards to my left, matching my pace exactly, staying just out of sight. I walked faster, the sounds got faster, I stopped, they stopped. Whatever was following me was tracking my movements perfectly and wanted me to know it was there. I decided to head straight back to my house, moving as quickly as I could without actually running. The sounds followed me the entire way, never getting closer but never falling back either. When I got to the edge of my yard, I made a break for the house, sprinted across the open ground, and didn't stop until I was inside with the door locked behind me. Through the window, I could see movement at the tree line, a large, dark shape that stood there for a long moment, watching me through the glass before slowly retreating into the shadows. That night was the worst one. Around midnight, the vocalizations started, louder than I'd ever heard them. Coming from multiple directions surrounding my house, the wood knocking began too, sharp cracks echoing through the darkness from all sides, north, south, east, west. It was like they were communicating with each other, sending signals, coordinating something. I was at the center of whatever they were planning. Then something hit my house, a heavy thud against the wall that shook the pictures on their hooks. Then another and another. I ran to the window and saw rocks, big ones, being thrown from the tree line. Bigfoot was literally throwing rocks at my house, testing my defenses, trying to flush me out. The barrage lasted maybe 20 minutes. When it stopped, the silence was almost worse. I sat in the hallway with my back against the wall, every light in the house blazing, waiting for something to come through a door or a window. Around 2 a.m, I heard the back door creak. That scratching from weeks ago had weakened it more than I realized. Something was pushing against it, testing the damaged wood. Slowly, patiently, like it had all the time in the world. I grabbed the only weapon I had, a baseball bat, and positioned myself in the hallway where I could see the back door. The pressure against the door increased. Wood groaned. Something was going to give, and it was going to give soon. I had a moment of clarity. Whatever was about to come through that door was bigger, stronger, and faster than me. My baseball bat wasn't going to do anything except maybe make it angry. My only chance was to get out, get in my truck, and get as far from this property as possible. I moved to the front of the house, grabbed my keys from the hook by the door, and quietly opened the front entrance. The yard looked clear. My truck was maybe 30 feet away. 30 feet between me and survival. I ran. I'd made it about halfway to the truck when I heard it. That rumbling growl coming from somewhere behind and to my left. They'd been waiting. They'd known I'd try to escape this way. I didn't look back, just kept running, key fob in my hand, jamming the unlock button over and over. I heard something crash through the brush at the edge of the yard. Heavy footsteps pounding across the ground behind me, getting closer with every second, faster than anything that size should be able to move. I reached the truck, yanked the door open, threw myself inside, and slammed it shut just as something massive impacted the side of the vehicle. The whole truck rocked like it had been hit by another car. A shadow passed by the window, and for one terrible moment, I looked directly into a face that was almost human, but utterly wrong. Dark eyes, flat nose, mouth open in a snarl that revealed teeth that looked designed for tearing. I got the key in the ignition and started the engine, put it in gear and floored it. The truck fishtailed on the gravel as I tore down my driveway, not stopping, not looking back, not caring about anything except putting distance between me and whatever was in my rearview mirror. I drove for 3 hours before I finally stopped, pulled into a gas station parking lot, and just sat there shaking for another hour after that. I didn't go back to my property for almost a month. Stayed with relatives, told them I was taking some time off to deal with stress from work. When I finally did return, it was with a police escort. I told them I was worried about vandalism. The house was damaged but intact. The back door had been broken completely off its hinges. Some windows were cracked from where rocks had hit them, but nothing had actually gotten inside. I found new tracks around the property, fresh ones, made within the last few days. Whatever was living in those woods was still there, still watching, still waiting. I put the property up for sale the next week. It's still on the market. Not a lot of buyers for remote acreage with documented evidence of something dangerous living on it. Yeah, I told the realtor, seemed like the right thing to do. The footage I captured is still sitting on my hard drive. I've thought about releasing it, but every time I consider it, I remember that night. The feeling of being hunted. The absolute certainty that I was going to die. Here's what I know for certain after everything I went through. Bigfoot is real. Something large and intelligent and dangerous lives in the forests of the Pacific Northwest, and probably in other wild places around the world. It's been avoiding humans for as long as our species has existed, and it's very good at it. I also know that we're not supposed to find it. Bigfoot doesn't want to be discovered. Those creatures on my property could have killed me multiple times, and they chose not to. But they made their message crystal clear. Stay away. Stop looking. Leave them alone. Looking back, I think my encounter was a warning. A way of saying that I'd gotten too close, seen too much, and if I kept pushing, I wouldn't survive the next time. So I stopped, packed up my cameras, sold my property, moved somewhere with no forests anywhere nearby. Sometimes I think about showing that footage to people, about finally giving the world the evidence it's been looking for. But then I remember the last thing I saw as I was driving away from my property that night. A massive shape standing at the end of my driveway, watching my truck disappear down the road. Patient, waiting, like it knew I'd be back eventually. Maybe I will go back someday, but probably not. Some mysteries are better left unsolved, and some creatures are better left alone.
Oh God. Keep going. Keep going. Jesus.
I spent 6 years on Navajo land documenting something that shouldn't exist. What started as a simple archaeological assignment turned into a nightmare that still follows me home. I came to study ancient pottery fragments. I left believing in monsters. This isn't the story I thought I'd be telling when I first arrived on the reservation. I thought I'd be writing papers about ceramic patterns and trade routes, contributing to academic knowledge about indigenous peoples of the American Southwest. Instead, I'm writing this as a warning to anyone who might follow in my footsteps. My name doesn't matter. What matters is what I saw, what hunted me, and what I learned about the things that walk the desert at night wearing skins that aren't theirs. This isn't about artifacts anymore. This is about survival. This is about understanding that the world is bigger and stranger and more terrifying than anything they teach you in university. This is about learning too late that some warnings should be heeded, some places should never be disturbed, and some doors, once open, can never be fully closed. The Navajo Nation spreads across northeastern Arizona, northwestern New Mexico, and southeastern Utah, over 27,000 square miles of high desert plateau, red rock canyons, and isolation so complete it changes you. It's a landscape of extremes. Summer days bake the rocks until they're too hot to touch. Winter nights drop below freezing. The wind never stops. It howls through the canyons, rattles the windows of trailers perched on the edge of nowhere, and carries sounds from miles away. Towns are separated by dozens of miles of nothing. You can drive for an hour on a straight highway and never see another vehicle, never pass a building, never encounter another human being. Cell service is a luxury that exists only near the larger communities. Help, when you need it, is always too far away. The landscape is beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way. Endless vistas of red and orange rock formations, mesas that look like ancient fortresses, canyons that cut deep into the earth like wounds. But there's something else about the place, something that sits underneath the beauty like a current running through deep water. You feel it when you're alone out there. The land is old, older than the reservations, older than America, older than most civilizations. It remembers things. It holds on to them. And if you pay attention, if you're quiet and still, you can feel that weight of memory pressing down on you. I arrived in early spring with a university contract to document and catalog pottery shards near a remote chapter house. The assignment seemed straightforward. Previous surveys had identified several sites with promising artifacts. My job was to expand on that work, map the locations more precisely, and see what else might be buried in the sand. It was supposed to take 6 months. I ended up staying 6 years. The locals were kind but distant when I first showed up. They helped me find a trailer to rent, pointed me toward the dig sites, sold me supplies at the trading post. But there was a reserve in their interactions, a sense that they were waiting to see what kind of person I was, whether I could be trusted. I didn't understand it then. I thought it was just cultural difference, the natural wariness of a tight-knit community toward an outsider. Within my first week, an elderly woman at the trading post pulled me aside while I was buying groceries. She looked around to make sure no one else was listening, then leaned in close and gave me 3 rules. Never whistle at night, never talk about certain things after dark. And if I heard my name called from outside, don't answer. Don't even look. I nodded and smiled, chalking it up to superstition. Every culture has its taboos, its things you're not supposed to do. I told myself I'd respect their beliefs, be a good guest, follow their rules even if I didn't understand them. But I didn't believe a word of it. I thought it was folklore, nothing more. Stories told to children, traditions maintained out of habit rather than necessity. That was my first mistake, dismissing their warnings as primitive superstition rather than hard-won wisdom passed down through generations who had learned these truths the difficult way. They set me up in a small trailer about 8 miles from the nearest neighbor, positioned at the end of a dirt road that barely deserved the name. The trailer was old but functional, with a small kitchen, a bedroom hardly bigger than the bed itself, and windows that looked out over endless desert. At night, the silence was absolute. No traffic, no voices, no sounds of civilization. Just the wind and the vast emptiness pressing against the thin metal walls. I spent my evenings cataloging pottery fragments by lantern light when the power was out, which was often content with the solitude. I'd always preferred working alone. The isolation didn't bother me, or so I thought. The stories started slowly, the way these things always do. At the trading post, I'd hear fragments of conversations in Navajo that would stop abruptly when I approached. At the chapter house where people gathered for community meetings, there would be intense discussions that switched to English the moment someone noticed me listening. I was curious by nature. It's what made me a good archaeologist. So I started asking questions, gently probing, to understand what everyone seemed to know but wouldn't say. I spent my days working out of that small trailer, cataloging finds, planning excavations, and slowly building trust with the community. The work was tedious but satisfying. Each pottery shard told a story about the people who had lived here centuries ago, about their trade networks and daily lives. But the real stories, I was beginning to realize, weren't buried in the ground. They were alive in the present, whispered in corners, discussed in low tones. The first person who actually talked to me in detail was the old man who worked the register at the trading post. I'd been coming in weekly for 3 months, always polite, always respectful, always making an effort to learn a few words of Navajo. One afternoon, when the store was empty except for us, he looked at me for a long time, his weathered face unreadable. Then he sighed, like he'd made a difficult decision, and told me about the sheep. A rancher who lived about 15 miles north had found 12 of his sheep dead in a single night. But they weren't just killed the way a predator would kill. They were opened up with surgical precision, organs removed and arranged in specific patterns on the ground around the bodies. There was no blood anywhere, which made no sense. No tracks leading to or from the site. No signs of a struggle. Just 12 dead sheep mutilated in ways that suggested intelligence and purpose rather than animal hunger. The rancher wouldn't go back to that part of his land, the old man said, wouldn't even drive past it. He'd sold off the rest of that herd and refused to talk about what happened. I asked if it could have been coyotes or maybe someone with a grudge against the rancher. The old man shook his head slowly and said one word in Navajo I didn't recognize. When I asked him to translate, he refused. He just said to stay away from the old hogans, the traditional Navajo dwellings that had been abandoned over the years, and to never, ever go near the canyon systems after dark. Over the next few months, more people opened up to me. A woman at the chapter house pulled me aside after a community dinner and told me about her brother. He'd been driving home late one night on one of the long straight highways that cut through the reservation. There was nothing around for miles in either direction. He was doing 60 miles per hour when something started running alongside his truck in the darkness beyond his headlights. At first, he thought it was a dog or a coyote, she said, but it kept perfect pace with the truck as he accelerated to 65, 70 miles per hour. Then, in the brief moment when his headlights swept across it during a turn, he saw it stand up on 2 legs, look directly at him with a human face, and sprint off into the desert faster than anything that size should be able to move. He drove straight home and didn't leave his house for 3 days. Another man, a teacher at the local school, described waking up at 3 a.m. to hear someone calling his name from outside. The voice was his own, exactly his own, down to the slight stutter he got when he was nervous. It was asking to be let in, saying it had locked itself out and it was cold. He knew with absolute certainty that he was in his bed, that there was no logical way he could be outside calling to himself. But the voice was perfect. If he hadn't been lying there listening to it, he would have sworn it was really him. He stayed inside until morning, too terrified to even approach the windows. When the sun came up, he found handprints on the glass. That wasn't the strange part. The strange part was that there were prints on both sides. Marks on the outside, like someone had been pressing their hands against the window, and identical marks on the inside, as if something had been inside his house, matching the positions exactly. The more people I talked to, the more I realized the stories followed distinct patterns. Animals that move wrong, like their joints bent in directions they shouldn't. Voices mimicking loved ones, calling people outside in the darkness. Figures that appeared as coyotes or dogs from a distance, but stood upright when they thought no one was watching. And always that feeling of being watched that made your skin crawl even when you couldn't see anything. A family told me about seeing a naked figure crouched on their roof at 3 a.m., completely hairless and pale, watching them through their bedroom window. When they turned on the lights, it was gone. But the next morning, there were scratches on the roof deep enough to gouge through the metal, and a smell that lingered for days, sweet and rotten, like flowers left too long in a vase mixed with meat gone bad. Local teenagers told me they refused to drive certain roads after dark, even if it meant taking 40-mile detours that added over an hour to their trips. When I asked why, they looked at each other nervously and wouldn't give specifics, just that bad things happened on those roads. Cars broke down for no reason. People saw things in their headlights that shouldn't exist. And sometimes, if you stopped to help someone who appeared to be stranded on the roadside, they'd get close to your window and you'd see that their face wasn't quite right, that their proportions were off, that they smelled like death. I started keeping a map, marking the locations where events had occurred. A pattern emerged quickly. The sightings clustered around specific areas. Old abandoned hogans that had been empty for decades. Canyon systems that cut deep into the mesas. Sites where ceremonial structures had once stood. There was one particular canyon north of where I was staying that appeared in story after story. People drove miles out of their way to avoid it. No one would camp there. No one would hike there. And everyone who mentioned it got the same haunted look in their eyes. When I asked directly about that canyon, a woman at the chapter house told me it was a place where bad things had happened long ago. She wouldn't elaborate. She just said the ground there was wrong, that it remembered, and that smart people stayed away. The earth itself felt different there, she said, like it was watching you. I'd been on the reservation for over a year when a medicine man finally agreed to speak with me. The meeting was arranged through the woman at the chapter house, and it came with strict conditions. I was to come alone at sunset, and I was to swear on everything I held sacred that I would never share specific details of protection rituals or ceremonies. Some knowledge, she explained, was dangerous in the wrong hands. I agreed immediately. His home was simple and traditional, a small structure that felt rooted in the land rather than imposed upon it. Sage burned in a clay bowl when I arrived, the smoke thick and pungent, making my eyes water and my sinuses burn. We sat across from each other on blankets laid over the packed earth floor. He studied me for a long time before speaking, his dark eyes taking in everything about me, weighing and measuring. When he finally spoke, it was in a mixture of Navajo and English, his voice rough with age but strong. He used the Navajo term for them, Yinadlushi. The word itself felt heavy, dangerous, skinwalkers. He explained that they were witches who had broken the deepest taboos of Navajo culture, who had chosen a dark path in exchange for terrible power. They weren't myths or legends or stories to scare children. They were real people who had made real choices and gained abilities that violated the natural order. By wearing the skins of animals, he said, they could transform, take on the shape and abilities of coyotes, wolves, bears, birds, move faster than any human should move, see in complete darkness, track prey across impossible distances. But the transformation was imperfect, he explained. There were always signs for those who knew what to look for. He taught me those signs with the gravity of someone passing on survival knowledge. Animals acting wrong, too aware, too intelligent, their movements too fluid or too jerky. A coyote that stands and watches you for too long, that doesn't run when it should. That seems to be thinking rather than just reacting. Dogs that move with their joints bending backwards. Birds that fly in patterns that make no sense. The smell was another sign. The smell of decay with no visible source, sweet and rotten mixed together in a way that made your stomach turn. It would appear suddenly, overwhelm you, then vanish just as quickly. And the most important sign of all, the feeling of being watched that goes beyond normal paranoia, that sits in your bones and screams at you to run, that makes every primitive instinct you have stand up and pay attention. If I encountered one directly, he said with great emphasis, I must follow specific rules. Never make eye contact. The eyes are windows, he explained, and if a skinwalker looks into your eyes, it can mark you, claim you, follow you. Never speak to it, no matter what it says or whose voice it uses. They can mimic perfectly your mother, your best friend, your own voice calling for help. But it's not them, it's never them. He reached into a leather pouch and removed several items, each wrapped carefully in cloth. He unwrapped them one by one, explaining their significance in terms I can't repeat here. I made a promise, and I'll keep it. But he gave me these items with instructions on when and how to use them. I keep them with me always now. They're in a small pouch on my belt, even here, thousands of miles from the reservation. The medicine man showed me signs to look for around a place. Marks that indicated a skinwalker had been there or was claiming territory. Certain arrangements of stones or sticks, specific symbols drawn in the dirt, animals found dead in particular positions. These weren't random, he stressed. They were messages, warnings, declarations of ownership. He warned me that talking about skinwalkers draws their attention, that focusing on them, thinking about them too much, makes you visible in ways that are hard to explain. Fear especially broadcasts like a signal. They're drawn to it the way predators are drawn to wounded prey. If you show fear, if you acknowledge their existence too directly, you mark yourself as potential prey, or worse, as someone who might know too much. Certain places are worse than others, he explained. Old burial grounds hold the energy of death. Abandoned ceremonial sites where powerful rituals were once performed retain that power. Locations where violence occurred, murders, battles, acts of cruelty, absorb that darkness into the earth itself. Skinwalkers are drawn to these places like moths to flame. The darkness calls to them. It feeds them. If one follows you home, he said with absolute seriousness, you must never let it inside. It will use every trick it knows. It will sound like your mother begging to be let in from the cold, like a child crying for help, like your own voice saying you're locked out. But you must never open that door. Once you invite it across your threshold, once you grant it access to your safe space, it owns you. They can curse you in multiple ways, he explained. Making direct eye contact is one. That connection allows them to mark you spiritually, to create a link that lets them find you anywhere. But the worst is corpse powder. It's made from the ground bones of the dead, mixed with other things he wouldn't specify. If a skinwalker throws it at you and it touches your skin, you become tied to them. You become part of their world, marked and hunted. The medicine man's final warning was the most disturbing. He said that curiosity was dangerous, that seeking them out, trying to document them or prove their existence was the worst thing I could do. It would draw their attention in ways I couldn't imagine, make me interesting to them, turn me from a casual observer into a target. But I could see in his eyes that he knew I wouldn't listen. that I was already too curious, too committed to my documentation, that I'd crossed a line simply by asking too many questions. When I left his home that night, the desert felt different. The twilight shadows were darker and longer than they should have been. The silence was heavier, more oppressive. I drove back to my trailer with both hands tight on the wheel, checking my mirrors constantly, jumping at every shadow that moved at the edge of my headlights. The journey that usually took 20 minutes felt like hours. And when I finally got home and locked myself inside, I lay awake all night listening to the wind and wondering what else might be listening back. The incident started small and easy to dismiss. Strange occurrences that could be explained away if you wanted to convince yourself badly enough. I wanted to convince myself. I wasn't ready to believe that everything the medicine man had told me was literally true. So I made excuses, found rational explanations, told myself I was just jumpy from spending too much time alone in the desert. The sounds at night were the first thing. Something circling my trailer in the darkness, its footsteps crunching in the gravel and sand. I'd lie in bed listening to it pace around and around, always just out of sight of the windows. When I'd work up the courage to look outside, there was never anything there. Just empty desert stretching away under the stars. But in the morning, there would be tracks in the dust. And the tracks were wrong in exactly the way the medicine man had described. They'd start as clear coyote prints, 4 pads and claws pressed into the sand. Then they'd shift mid-stride into human footprints, bare feet with 5 distinct toes. Then back to coyote, then human again. The tracks circled my trailer in a deliberate pattern, like something was pacing, thinking, observing. One night, I heard my own voice outside calling my name. I was lying in bed reading when it started, and the shock of it made me drop my book. The voice was perfect, exactly mine, with the same inflections and rhythms. It was asking me to let myself in, saying it had gone outside and somehow gotten locked out. Could I please open the door? It was getting cold. I sat frozen, one hand clamped over my mouth to keep from making any sound. The voice continued for maybe 10 minutes, alternating between calling my name and explaining increasingly elaborate scenarios for why I was supposedly locked outside my own trailer. Each explanation was more desperate than the last. Finally, it stopped, mid-sentence, like someone had flipped a switch. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the voice had been. Dead ravens started appearing near my door almost every morning. Their necks broken with surgical precision, wings spread in specific formations that looked deliberate. I'd clear them away before starting my day, throwing the bodies far from my trailer. But by nightfall, there would be more, arranged in slightly different patterns, like someone was trying to communicate in a language I didn't understand. The smell came randomly and without warning. I'd be working at a dig site in the bright afternoon sun, carefully brushing dirt away from pottery shards when it would hit me. Thick and rotten and sweet all at once, like flowers left too long in a vase mixed with meat, gone bad in the summer heat. It would make my eyes water and my throat close. I'd search frantically for the source, checking behind rocks, under equipment, anywhere a dead animal might be hidden. There was never anything. The smell would just appear, hang heavy in the air for minutes or sometimes hours, then vanish as suddenly as it came. My truck started refusing to start on certain nights. I'd turn the key and get nothing but a clicking sound, the engine completely dead. This happened maybe once a week, always after dark, always when I was miles from help. I'd have to sleep in the cab, doors locked, watching the darkness press against the windows until morning came. Then the truck would start perfectly on the first try, like there had never been any problem at all. I took it to a mechanic in town who checked everything. Battery, starter, alternator, all the connections. He said the truck was fine, no issues he could find. But I could see the look in his eyes when I described the pattern of failures. He knew what was happening, he just wouldn't say it out loud. The feeling of being watched intensified whenever I worked near certain canyons. I'd be completely focused on documenting a find, my attention absorbed in measuring and photographing and taking notes. Then suddenly my skin would prickle and every instinct I had would start screaming. I'd look up slowly, scanning the canyon rims and rock formations. Never saw anything. But the feeling wouldn't go away. It sat on my shoulders like a physical weight, making it hard to breathe, making my hands shake so badly I couldn't work. After the third time this happened in the same canyon, the one people had warned me about, I stopped going there entirely. It wasn't worth it. The pottery shards weren't that important. Nothing was important enough to justify the way that place made me feel. Other archaeologists and researchers working in the area started reporting problems too. Sites were being ransacked overnight but not looted. Equipment would be scattered everywhere. Carefully dug test pits filled back in with dirt, notes torn into pieces and spread across the ground. Nothing was stolen. There was no financial motive. It was like something wanted to disrupt the work, drive people away, but didn't care about the artifacts themselves. One researcher packed up and left after finding all his equipment destroyed for the third time. He told me he'd seen something watching from the rocks while he was excavating, something that moved like a person but didn't look quite right. When he'd raised his hand to wave, thinking it was another hiker, the thing had dropped to all fours and scrambled away impossibly fast. The police officer I'd met at the trading post mentioned that they were getting unusual reports. Livestock found dead with no signs of predation, just mutilated in ways that suggested intelligence rather than animal hunger. Increased sightings of animals that acted wrong, and something strange happening in multiple towns at once. Dogs going crazy at night, all of them barking in the same direction at exactly the same time, like they were all seeing the same thing that humans couldn't see. When I asked what direction the dogs were barking, the officer pulled out a map and marked the locations. I felt my stomach drop when I saw it. The dogs were all barking toward the canyon I'd stopped visiting, the place that made my skin crawl, the place where too many stories clustered. I should have left then. Every rational part of my brain was screaming at me to pack up my equipment, get in my truck, and drive away from the reservation as fast as possible. But I didn't. I stayed. I told myself I was being paranoid, that there had to be logical explanations for everything that was happening. Coyotes with mange could explain the weird animal sightings. Sleep deprivation could explain the voice that sounded like mine. Equipment failure could explain the truck. Coincidence could explain all of it if I tried hard enough. But deep down, underneath all my rational explanations and scientific training, I knew better. I knew exactly what was happening. I'd been warned. I'd been given protection. I'd been told to leave certain places alone. And I'd ignored it all because I was curious, because I wanted to see for myself, because I wanted proof. That curiosity, that need to document and understand, was going to cost me more than I could imagine. It already had, though I didn't fully realize it yet. The first direct encounter happened in my third year on the reservation. I was working at an excavation site in a remote canyon. Not the one everyone warned me about, but close to it, maybe 5 miles south. The work had been going well all day. I'd uncovered several intact pottery pieces and was documenting their positions carefully, taking photographs from multiple angles, making detailed notes about soil composition and depth. I lost track of time the way you do when work is absorbing. One moment the sun was high overhead, and the next it was touching the canyon rim. The shift happened faster than it should have, the way time compresses when you're not paying attention. I looked up from my work and realized with a jolt that I had maybe 30 minutes of good light left. Not enough time to properly pack everything up and make it back to my truck before full dark. I started working faster, stowing equipment, covering the excavation to protect it from wind and animals. That's when I heard the footsteps. They were human footsteps, deliberate and heavy, coming from somewhere above me on the canyon rim. I looked up and saw a figure silhouetted against the darkening sky, standing completely still, watching me. For a moment, I thought it was another hiker or maybe someone from the reservation checking on me. I raised my hand to wave. The figure didn't wave back. It just stood there, utterly motionless. And even from that distance, I could feel its attention fixed on me like a physical weight. Then it dropped to all fours and came down the canyon wall. It didn't climb the way a person would climb, carefully finding handholds and footholds. It scrambled down impossibly fast, its limbs moving in ways that made my stomach turn, like a spider scuttling down a wall. The movement was wrong in every possible way. I ran to my truck, my hands shaking so badly I dropped my keys twice. The metal was hot from sitting in the sun all day, burning my fingers as I fumbled with the door handle. Behind me, I could hear that thing getting closer, could hear the scrape of its hands and feet on rock, could hear something that might have been breathing or might have been laughter. I got the door open, threw myself into the driver's seat, and somehow got the key in the ignition. The engine turned over on the first try, a small miracle given how my truck had been acting lately. My headlights came on automatically, illuminating the excavation site and the area around my truck. The skinwalker was maybe 30 feet away, caught in the full glare of my headlights. I got a clear look at it for the first time, and what I saw made every rational explanation I'd been clinging to evaporate like water on hot stone. It appeared to be a man covered in a coyote skin, but the proportions were completely wrong. The arms were too long, hanging nearly to the ground even though the thing was standing partially upright. The legs bent backwards at what should have been the knees, digitigrade like an animal rather than plantigrade like a human. The head was the worst part, too large for the body, tilted at an angle that would have broken a normal person's neck. It started walking toward my truck in jerking, unnatural movements. Each step looked like it required conscious thought, like the thing was operating a body it hadn't quite figured out how to control properly, like a puppet with tangled strings, or a person learning to walk for the first time but getting all the mechanics wrong. I remembered what the medicine man had said. Don't look at its eyes, don't acknowledge it, don't speak to it. I stared straight ahead through the windshield, both hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. My peripheral vision screamed at me to look, to track the threat, to keep my eyes on the danger. But I kept my gaze fixed forward. The skinwalker circled my truck slowly, dragging its fingers along the windows and doors. The sound of those fingers on glass made my skin crawl. Long nails or claws scratching and tapping, like it was testing the barriers between us, looking for a way in. I could see its reflection in my side mirror, distorted and wrong. The face was human but stretched, the skin pulled too tight over bones that were the wrong shape. The eyes didn't reflect light the way human eyes should. They were flat and dead like a shark's eyes. Then it spoke. The voice was perfect English, calm and reasonable and utterly terrifying in its normalcy. It sounded exactly like the medicine man who had warned me, down to the slight accent and the rough quality from years of smoking. It was asking me to roll down the window, to just crack it a little bit, to trust it. I knew it wasn't him. I knew with absolute certainty that the medicine man was safe at home 20 miles away. But the voice was so perfect, so convincing, that part of my brain wanted to believe it, wanted to roll down the window and talk to this familiar, friendly voice. I clamped my teeth together to keep from responding, squeezed my eyes shut to avoid seeing that face, and put the truck in gear. I drove away slowly, fighting every instinct that screamed at me to floor it and get away as fast as possible. Something told me that showing fear, showing panic would make it worse, would trigger a chase response. So I backed up carefully, turned the truck around in a precise 3-point turn, and drove down the canyon road at exactly the speed I normally would have driven. The thing followed, keeping pace easily as I accelerated to 30, then 40, then 50 miles per hour. It ran alongside the truck with that same jerking gait, never falling behind, never showing any sign of effort or fatigue. Through my side window, I could see it matching my speed exactly, its 2 long arms swinging, its backwards bent legs pumping, its stretched face turned toward me with an expression that might have been curiosity or hunger or something I had no name for. I finally lost it when I reached the main highway. One moment it was there in my peripheral vision, keeping perfect pace, and the next it was just gone. Vanished into the desert night like it had never existed. I drove straight to town and checked into a motel, unable to face my trailer, unable to deal with being alone and isolated after what I'd just seen. I didn't sleep for 3 days. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that face pressed against my truck window, stretched and wrong, wearing the coyote skin like a poorly fitted costume. I kept seeing movement in the corner of my vision, turning to look and finding nothing there. My hand shook so badly I couldn't hold a coffee cup without spilling. The motel clerk asked if I was all right. I lied and said I was fine, just tired from working long hours. The next year, things escalated in ways I couldn't have predicted. Sightings became more frequent across the entire reservation. Multiple people reported the same phenomena I'd experienced. The circling footsteps, the voice mimicry, the feeling of being stalked. It was like something had woken up or been activated, spreading out from that cursed canyon to affect larger and larger areas. The woman at the chapter house told me about a neighbor who heard her deceased husband's voice outside her window every single night for a week. He'd died 6 months earlier, she said, from a heart attack while working in his garden. But every night at exactly 3 a.m., his voice would start calling to her, begging her to let him inside, saying he was cold and afraid and needed her. She almost opened the door on the 3rd night. Almost, but something about the voice was just slightly off, she said. The cadence was wrong by a fraction of a second. The breathing sounded shallow when her husband had been a heavy breather. Small details that her conscious mind wanted to dismiss, but her instincts wouldn't let her ignore. On the 7th night, the voice stopped coming, but she found scratches all around her doorframe like something with very long nails had been trying to pry its way in. A rancher found his entire herd of cattle dead in a perfect circle, maybe 40 animals total. They were all facing outward, like they'd been arranged that way deliberately. No signs of predation, no wounds, nothing to indicate what had killed them. The vet who examined the bodies said they appeared to have died of fright. Their hearts had simply stopped, all at the same time, like someone had flipped a switch. People started describing a specific figure they'd seen in different locations, sometimes 50 miles apart on the same night. It was tall and emaciated, wearing what looked like badly tanned hide stitched together in patches. It never approached humans directly, it just watched from a distance, from the tops of mesas, from abandoned buildings, from the side of highways. Always watching, always still, always somehow present where it shouldn't be. My trailer was broken into while I was at a dig site. Nothing was stolen, but everything was wrong. Items had been moved slightly, rearranged in ways that made my skin crawl. My notes were spread out on the table, organized by date and location in perfect chronological order. My clothes were folded in neat piles on the bed, arranged by color. Someone, something, had been in my home, going through my things with deliberate care, learning about me. I started reviewing old photographs from the dig sites, and that's when I noticed it. In the background of multiple photos taken at different locations over weeks and months, there was a figure, always distant, always at the very edge of the frame, always watching. Sometimes it appeared human, sometimes it looked like an animal standing on its hind legs. But it was always there, documented in image after image. And I hadn't seen it while taking the pictures. Symbols started appearing on my truck, drawn in the dust that accumulated overnight. The medicine man had warned me about these specific marks. They were curses, claims of ownership, declarations that I belonged to something now. Each morning I'd wash them off with water from my jug, scrubbing the metal until my hands hurt. Each night they'd reappear, more elaborate than before, drawn by fingers that left no other traces. The sounds on my roof got worse. Something heavy was walking up there at night, back and forth, for hours at a time. I'd lie in bed listening to it pace above me, too scared to move, too scared to breathe. One morning I climbed up to look, against my better judgment, and found handprints in the dust. But they were on the inside of my trailer, on the ceiling above my bed, like something had been crawling around up there in the space between the roof and the ceiling panel. The chapter house held an emergency meeting. Multiple families were temporarily moving away from the reservation, staying with relatives in other states or in the larger towns with more people and better lighting. The sense of something wrong had spread beyond individual incidents. People felt it everywhere now, that weight of being watched, that sense that the normal rules of reality had been suspended. The medicine man performed a protection ceremony for me, burning herbs and singing in Navajo for hours. The smoke made shapes in the air that seemed almost intentional, almost meaningful. When he was done, he looked at me with deep sadness in his eyes and said something had marked me as a target, that I'd drawn its attention in ways that couldn't be undone, that I needed to leave immediately. I refused. I'd become obsessed with documenting everything, with understanding what was happening. I told myself it was professional obligation, that I needed to record these phenomena for academic purposes. The truth was darker and more complicated. The more attention I paid to the skinwalker, the more it seemed to interact with me. And some sick part of my brain found that fascinating. I'd crossed a line from being terrified to being curious again. That curiosity was like an addiction, pulling me deeper into something I should have been running from. In my 5th year, the stalking became systematic and deliberate. I realized I was being actively followed whenever I left my trailer, not just occasionally, every single time. I'd be driving to a dig site 20 miles away and see a coyote sitting on a rock by the road watching me pass. Its head would turn to track my truck, its eyes fixed on me with an intelligence that no animal should have. 20 miles later, there would be another coyote. Same size, same coloring, same eerily intelligent gaze. 50 miles after that, another one. It should have been impossible for the same animal to cover those distances so quickly, but I knew with bone-deep certainty that it was the same coyote every time, the same skinwalker tracking me, learning my patterns, letting me know it was always there. It would sit in ditches, on fence posts, on top of abandoned buildings, always just watching, never approaching. The message was clear. I was being monitored. My movements were being cataloged. Something was keeping track of where I went and what I did, and it wanted me to know it. I started keeping detailed notes of the sightings because that's what archaeologists do. We document things. A pattern emerged that was simultaneously fascinating and terrifying. The coyote appeared every 3 days, always at dusk, always in a position where I couldn't miss seeing it. It was communicating something, but I couldn't figure out what. A schedule? A warning? An invitation? Other locals started reporting the same thing. They'd describe a figure matching what I'd seen, appearing near the roads I regularly drove. The skinwalker was making itself visible to others now, expanding its presence, claiming more territory. Or maybe it was showing off. Look what I can do. Look who I'm watching. Look how powerless you all are to stop me. My truck broke down one night on an isolated stretch of highway 20 miles from the nearest town in either direction. The engine just died without warning, all the lights went out, and I was sitting in complete darkness. No moon that night, no stars visible through the cloud cover. Just absolute blackness pressing against the windows. I called for a tow truck on my cell phone, grateful I had signal that far out. The dispatcher said it would be at least 4 hours. I settled in to wait, doors locked, windows uptight. That's when I heard it circling. Footsteps in the gravel, slow and deliberate, walking around and around my truck in a measured pace. The breathing was worse than the footsteps, deep and wet, like something was struggling to pull air through damaged lungs or throat. That corpse smell flooded the cab, so thick and overwhelming that I gagged and had to fight not to vomit. Then it started using voices. First my mother, asking why I wasn't answering her calls, begging me to open the door, her voice breaking with what sounded like genuine tears. But my mother lived 2,000 miles away, and we'd just talked that morning. Then friends from back home, their voices perfect down to their distinctive laughs and speech patterns, telling me there was an emergency and I needed to help them right away. I sat there for 4 hours, hands clamped over my ears, humming old songs to block out the voices. They cycled through everyone I'd ever cared about, one after another, each one begging me to open the door or roll down the window, each one sounding so real and desperate that my hand actually reached for the door handle twice before I stopped myself. When the tow truck finally arrived, the driver saw nothing. He walked all around my truck with his flashlight, checking underneath, looking in the desert. No footprints, no signs of any animal or person. And when he tried my truck, it started perfectly on the first try, like there had never been any problem at all. The medicine man told me again that I needed to leave, that the skinwalker had chosen me for reasons I couldn't understand, that it was playing with me, that it would eventually escalate beyond stalking. But I still refused. I was documenting everything now, taking notes every day, keeping meticulous records of each incident. I told myself I was being scientific, objective, that this was important data. The truth was, I'd stopped thinking clearly months ago. The fear and obsession had become twisted together until I couldn't separate them. The skinwalker terrified me, but it also fascinated me in ways I couldn't explain or justify. I wanted to understand it, wanted to communicate with it, wanted to know what it wanted from me. That desire was dangerous and irrational, but I couldn't let it go. I set up a camera pointed at my trailer, running on battery power, recording whenever it detected motion. What I saw when I reviewed the footage made my blood run cold. Every night, right around 2 a.m., something would approach from the tree line. It walked on 2 legs but hunched over, arms dangling almost to the ground. It would circle my trailer multiple times, stopping occasionally to press its face against the windows, the glass fogging from its breath. The footage was blurry and dark, but I could make out enough detail to know it was the same thing I'd encountered in the canyon. The same wrong proportions, the same jerking movements, the same sense of something wearing a body like an ill-fitting costume. It knew the camera was there, looked directly at it several times, its head tilting in a gesture that might have been curiosity or mockery. I woke up multiple nights to find it standing outside my bedroom window, swaying slightly like it was listening to me breathe. I'd lie there paralyzed, watching its silhouette through the thin curtains until it finally walked away. Sometimes it would be gone in minutes. Sometimes it would stand there for hours, just swaying and listening. the scratching inside my walls started around the same time. Not from outside, from inside, like something was moving through the space between the inner and outer walls of the trailer. I'd hear it at night, scratching and scraping, working its way around the perimeter of my home. During the day, I'd check for entry points, for holes or gaps where an animal might have gotten in. There was nothing. Just smooth metal on the outside, intact paneling on the inside, and something impossible moving through the space between them. Dead animals appeared around my trailer in patterns I recognized from the medicine man's warnings. Rabbits arranged in circles, birds placed at the cardinal points like compass markers. Once even a deer laid out with its legs pointing in 4 different directions. These weren't random kills by predators. They were messages, declarations, warnings written in blood and fur. By my 6th year on the reservation, I'd stopped sleeping more than an hour or 2 a night. The exhaustion was crushing. I'd doze off during the day at dig sites, jerk awake with no memory of closing my eyes. My hands trembled constantly. I'd lost 20 pounds without trying. People in town started avoiding me because I looked like death, hollow-eyed, pale, jumpy. They could see something was wrong, that I was being hunted. But no one knew how to help or whether help was even possible at this point. I couldn't focus on work anymore. Every time I tried to catalog artifacts or plan excavations, that feeling of being watched would overwhelm me. I'd have to pack up and leave, my heart pounding, my skin crawling, every primitive instinct screaming that I needed to run. The sites themselves started to feel wrong, like the ground was rejecting me, like I'd overstayed my welcome in a place where humans were barely tolerated. I made a decision that any rational person would have recognized as insane. I decided to confront it, to go back to that canyon where I'd first encountered the skinwalker and face it directly. Part of me thought maybe I could communicate, could understand what it wanted, could make some kind of bargain or arrangement. The larger part of me just wanted it to be over, one way or another. The stalking, the fear, the endless waiting for the next incident. I couldn't take it anymore. I drove to the canyon just as the sun touched the horizon, that liminal time when day and night overlap, and the normal rules don't quite apply. I brought the items the medicine man had given me, carrying them in the small pouch on my belt. I'd memorized the words he'd taught me, practiced the protective gestures until they were automatic. I sat on the hood of my truck and waited. The feeling of being watched started immediately, so intense it was almost painful. It pressed down on me from all directions like physical pressure, like the air itself had weight. The canyon walls seemed to lean in closer, the shadows growing longer and darker even though the sun hadn't fully set yet. Every sound was amplified, my breathing, my heartbeat, the rustle of wind through sagebrush. Then I saw it emerge from the same spot where I'd first encountered it 3 years earlier. It looked different now, more human, like it had been practicing, learning, perfecting its disguise or maybe its transformation. It stood fully upright, maybe 8 feet tall, covered in a patchwork of different animal skins, stitched together with what looked like sinew or dried gut. Coyote, deer, rabbit, even what might have been bear. All wrong, all worn like a grotesque costume made by someone who understood the shapes but not the purpose. The face was a nightmare made flesh, human features stretched and elongated, skin pulled too tight over bones that were the wrong shape and size. The eyes were the worst part. They reflected the dying light like an animal's eyes, that tapetum lucidum flash you see in coyotes and cats. But the reflection was wrong somehow, the color off, the quality strange. Those eyes held intelligence but not humanity, awareness but not empathy, understanding but not compassion. It stood there at the edge of the clearing, swaying slightly, studying me with its head tilted at that angle that should have broken its neck. We looked at each other across maybe 40 feet of empty air, and I felt it assessing me the way a predator assesses prey. Calculating, considering, deciding. Then it started cycling through voices. The medicine man first, telling me to run, to get away while I still could. My mother asking why I'd abandoned her, why I never called anymore, her voice thick with tears. My own voice next, screaming for help, begging someone to save me from what was coming. Then friends from college I hadn't spoken to in years, all their voices perfect and familiar and terrifying coming from that stretched mouth. It began to approach, moving in that same jerking puppet-like way I remembered from 3 years ago. Each step looked wrong, like it was operating the body through trial and error rather than instinct. Like the transformation wasn't quite complete, or the magic wasn't quite working right. The movement was hypnotic in its wrongness, pulling my attention, making it hard to look away. I remembered the medicine man's instructions. I pulled out the items from the pouch, held them up between us with both hands, and spoke the words he'd taught me. They felt foreign in my mouth, ancient syllables, in a language I didn't know but somehow understood at a level deeper than conscious thought. The sounds carried power that I could feel vibrating in my chest and throat. The skinwalker stopped mid-step, its foot hanging in the air. It tilted its head further, studying me and the items I held. I saw recognition in those terrible eyes. It knew what I was holding, knew the words I was speaking, knew the significance of both. We stood there in the dying light as the sun continued its descent toward the horizon, neither of us moving, locked in some kind of silent standoff. The air between us felt thick and charged with something I had no name for. Not quite electricity, not quite magnetism, but something that made my hair stand on end and my skin prickle. The moment stretched, seconds becoming minutes, becoming hours in that strange way time works, when you're terrified beyond rational thought. Then, slowly, the skinwalker began to back away. It never broke eye contact, never turned around, just retreated step by step into the deepening shadows. Its movements were still jerky and wrong, but there was something almost like respect in the deliberate slowness. Or maybe I was reading emotions into something that didn't feel emotions the way humans do. Maybe I was trying to find familiar patterns in something fundamentally alien. The oppressive weight of its attention lifted gradually, like a physical pressure being released one increment at a time. I could breathe easier. My heart rate slowed from the panicked, sprinting pace it had reached. The canyon walls seemed to move back to their normal positions, the shadows to their normal lengths. When it finally disappeared into the rocks, I stood there shaking for another 10 minutes, unable to move, unable to process what had just happened. My legs felt like water. My hands were trembling so badly the items I'd been holding clattered against each other. When I finally managed to move, to put the items away and slide down from the truck hood, my knees nearly gave out. I drove back to my trailer that night and packed everything I owned. I worked through the darkness and into the morning, throwing clothes and equipment into boxes, not caring what went where or whether anything was organized. Books, pottery shards, camping gear, notes, all of it went into my truck in a chaotic jumble. When the sun came up, I was already on the road, heading east, putting as many miles between myself and the reservation as I could before stopping. I'm back home now, living in a city where the lights never go out and you're never more than a few feet from another person. Where the streets are always busy and the silence is filled with the ambient noise of civilization. Where the night doesn't feel dangerous because there are cameras and streetlights and neighbors who would hear if you screamed. but I still feel it sometimes, that weight of being watched pressing down on me from nowhere and everywhere at once. I'll be walking down a crowded street at noon, surrounded by hundreds of people, and suddenly my skin will prickle. The primitive part of my brain will start screaming that something is wrong, that I'm in danger, that I need to run. I'll turn around looking for the source, scanning faces and windows and doorways. There's never anything there, just normal people going about their normal day. But the feeling doesn't go away. It sits on my shoulders for minutes or hours, that sense of being observed by something that shouldn't exist. I'll catch movement in my peripheral vision and turn to look directly at it. Nothing. Just empty air or a curtain moving or a shadow that doesn't quite match the light source. Normal things that feel wrong in ways I can't explain. Sometimes at night, when the city is as quiet as it ever gets, I hear footsteps in the hallway outside my apartment, slow and deliberate, pacing back and forth past my door. The building is old and the hallways echo, so it could be anything. A neighbor going for a late-night walk, someone coming home from a night shift, the landlord doing his rounds, normal explanations that make perfect sense. But the footsteps pause outside my door for just a few seconds too long. I hear breathing that's just slightly too deep, too wet coming from the hallway. The smell seeps under my door sometimes, that sweet, rotten flower and decay smell that I recognize from the desert. I lie in bed with my heart pounding and tell myself it's just my imagination, just trauma and paranoia and exhaustion. But I know better. I've always known better. I still have the items the medicine man gave me. I keep them in a small box beside my bed, within arm's reach at all times. I still follow the rules he taught me, even though I'm thousands of miles from the reservation. I don't whistle at night. I don't answer if I hear my name called from outside. I don't talk about skinwalkers after dark, though I'm breaking that rule now by writing this. Some habits are too ingrained to break even when logic says they shouldn't matter anymore. 6 years of documentation, hundreds of stories collected from locals who trusted me enough to share their experiences, dozens of personal encounters ranging from strange sounds to direct confrontation, pages and pages of notes and observations and theories written in notebooks that I keep locked in a fireproof safe because I'm irrationally afraid they'll disappear. I can't explain any of it in rational terms. Science doesn't have answers for what I saw and experienced. The logical explanations I clung to for so long fell apart completely after that night in the canyon when I faced the skinwalker directly and it backed away from items it recognized and words it understood. Mass hallucination doesn't explain events witnessed by multiple unconnected people. Sleep deprivation doesn't explain physical evidence like tracks and photographs and dead animals. The medicine man's last words to me keep echoing in my head. He said some things exist whether we believe in them or not. That reality is bigger and stranger than what we've been taught to expect. The Navajo people have lived with this knowledge for centuries, passed it down through generations, developed ways to protect themselves, and coexist with things that science says shouldn't be real. I have nothing but respect for their warnings now, for their protective practices and traditions. They knew what was out there in the desert night. They tried to warn me from my very first week on the reservation. I chose not to listen until it was too late, until I'd drawn the attention of something that doesn't forget and doesn't let go. The desert remembers. That's what one of the elders told me when I was packing to leave. The land has a memory longer than any human life, and it holds on to things, good things and bad things, but especially the bad things. Violence and suffering and darkness sink into the rocks and sand, become part of the landscape, wait for someone to come along and disturb them. I disturbed something. I went to places I'd been explicitly warned to avoid, asked questions I shouldn't have asked, stayed when I should have left. I drew maps of sightings and documented encounters and paid attention in ways that made me visible. And whatever I woke up out there, whatever I drew to me through my curiosity and my need to understand, it's not done with me yet. I wonder sometimes if it followed me home or if I brought something back with me. If there's a difference between being haunted and being hunted. If the connection I made by paying too much attention, by seeking it out, by confronting it in that canyon. If that connection can ever be broken or if it's permanent now. A link forged in fear and curiosity that will last as long as I do. Some doors, once opened, can never be fully closed. That's the truth no one tells you when you start investigating things that shouldn't exist. Once you've seen behind the curtain, once you know what's really out there in the darkness, you can't unknow it. You can't pretend the world is simple and safe anymore. You carry that knowledge with you everywhere you go, and it colors everything you see. The skinwalkers are patient. They experience time differently than we do, the medicine man explained. To them, 6 years is nothing. A human lifetime is barely a moment. They have all the time in the world to watch, to wait, to circle closer in their own deliberate way. And if they've marked you as interesting, if they've chosen you as worthy of their attention, then you belong to them in ways that transcend simple geography. Distance doesn't matter to them, he said. You can run to the other side of the world and they'll still find you if they want to. The connection isn't physical. It's something deeper, stranger, harder to explain. Once they've marked you, once you've acknowledged them and they've acknowledged you back, you're part of their world whether you want to be or not. If you ever visit Navajo land, listen to the locals. When they tell you to stay away from certain places, believe them. When they warn you not to whistle at night or answer voices in the darkness, follow their advice. They're not sharing superstitions or entertaining tourists with scary stories. They're trying to keep you safe from something real, something ancient, something that doesn't care about your skepticism or your science or your rational explanations. Because once it notices you, once it decides you're interesting, once it marks you as its own, there's no going back. You'll spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder, jumping at shadows, wondering if that coyote you saw by the road is really just a coyote. You'll hear your own voice calling to you from empty rooms and know with absolute certainty that you're still inside, that the voice is something else wearing your sound like a mask. I'm writing this as a warning, not to scare you, but to prepare you. If you choose to visit the reservation, if you choose to explore those remote canyons and ancient sites, at least go in with your eyes open, at least respect the danger, at least understand that the warnings aren't folklore. They're survival information passed down through generations who learn these truths the difficult way. The desert is beautiful. The landscape is breathtaking. The archaeology is fascinating. The Navajo people are kind and generous with those who show proper respect. But underneath all that beauty, something else lives. Something that wears skins that don't belong to it. Something that speaks with voices of the dead. Something that watches from the shadows with eyes that reflect light like an animal's, but hold intelligence no animal should possess. I went looking for ancient pottery and found something far older. I went searching for artifacts and discovered that some things are better left buried, some knowledge is dangerous to possess, some questions shouldn't be asked. I spent 6 years documenting the impossible, and now the impossible follows me home. So believe what you want. Call it folklore, call it superstition, call it mass hysteria if it makes you feel safer. But when you're alone in the desert at night and you hear something scratching at your tent, when you see a coyote that moves wrong watching you from the tree line, when you hear your own voice calling to you from the darkness, remember this story. Remember that I didn't believe either, not until it was too late, not until I'd opened a door that can never be closed, Not until I'd caught the attention of something that will never look away. Not until I'd marked myself as interesting to forces that operate by rules I don't understand and can't predict. The skinwalkers are real, and some of them are watching you right now, deciding if you're worth the effort, deciding if you'd be interesting to follow, deciding if they want to add your voice to their collection, deciding if they want to wear your fear like the skins they wear. For more interesting stories, check this out.